Since you have this wisdom and this insight that strikes me as quite powerful, what is the reason that it isn't the predominant force, or will this kind of thinking be the predominant force?
That's a very good question. It goes back to something very simple, becomes complex quickly. You never learn by doing something right, because you're already doing it right. You only learn from mistakes, okay? Now, there are two kinds of mistakes. One is when you do something you shouldn't have done. A company bought another company it shouldn't have bought. Eastman Kodak bought Sterling Drug. It turned out to be a serious mistake, and they had to get rid of it, for example. That's called an error of commission. There's other type of errors when you didn't do something you should have done. Eastman Kodak didn't buy Xerox when they could have. That would turn out to be a serious mistake.
Dr. Russell Ackoff is one of my all-time favorite interviews. Stay tuned to find out why.
Checking audio. Audio check complete. Check camera 1. Check camera 2. Check camera 3. Phyllis, ready? 1, 2, 3.
You know, I like to show a video often. Some of you probably seen it a few times because I love running conversations with Dr. Russell Ackoff. Now, he's no longer with us, and you wonder why. I mean, maybe you're not like me, but I hate reading obituaries. One of the things I hate about it is that I always discover there's some extraordinary thing someone's done that no one knows about, or no one's ever asked the person a question. So I started, after I interviewed Russell Ackoff, I went on a journey to make sure I asked thinkers, leaders, mathematicians, scholars, what they thought about the basic issues of life. Russell Ackoff is one of the great systems thinkers. He was a companion and colleague of Dr. Edward Deming. And this person was really instrumental in changing the way industry operated, the way we thought about systems. So I run this again for you so that you can see why I'm so devoted to Russell Ackoff. Now, it's not even good video. This was shot in the early 2000s, right after the World Trade Center, 9/11. It was really a very basic interview, but such wisdom comes out of this man. And it's one of my most popular videos that runs all over the world. And people tell me, thank you for asking him those questions, because even though he was a systems thinker, nobody ever asked him about his basic views about life. So listen to Dr. Russell Ackoff, extraordinary scholar, colleague of Edward Deming, and someone who inspired me to really re-examine what an interview is.
You see, there are 5 types of content of the human mind: data, information, knowledge, understanding, and wisdom. It's a hierarchy. There's an old academic aphorism which says an ounce of information is worth a pound of data. An ounce of knowledge is worth a pound of information. An ounce of understanding is worth a pound of knowledge, and an ounce of wisdom is worth a pound of understanding. That makes an ounce of wisdom about 42,000 ounces of data, you see. The point is that data, information, knowledge, and understanding are all concerned with increasing our efficiency. How can we more effectively get what we want? Wisdom is concerned with effectiveness. And it's only fairly recently we've come to understand the difference between them. We used to use them synonymously. The best distinction I'm aware of is one that was made by Peter Drucker when he said there's a difference between doing things right and doing the right thing. See, doing the right thing is wisdom, effectiveness. Doing things right is efficiency. Now the curious thing is, the righter you do the wrong thing, the wronger you become. If you're doing the wrong thing and make a mistake and correct it, you become wronger. So it's better to do the right thing wrong than the wrong thing right. See? So we're now questioning. It turns out that almost every major social problem confronting us today is a consequence of trying to do the wrong things righter. So instead of looking at the efficiency with which we're pursuing our objectives, we're beginning to re-examine the objectives. Would you like an example?
Oh, I'm mesmerized. Go right ahead.
Well, take the healthcare system. As you know, it's been deteriorating terribly. We're the only developed country in the world that doesn't have universal coverage. We've got 42 million people uncovered. We are not the best healthcare system in the world, despite the politicians. According to the World Health Organization, we rank 37th, not number 1. Furthermore, we spend 3 times as much per capita, even though we don't cover everybody, as number 1. There's something is fundamentally wrong. And what's wrong is we never had a healthcare system. That's a misnomer. What do you pay a doctor or a hospital for? We're taking care of you when you're sick or disabled. It's a disability and sickness care system, not a healthcare system. Somebody said, aren't they the same thing? Well, of course not. What's the worst thing that can happen to somebody who depends on his income on the treatment of sickness and disability? See, if everybody were healthy, it would destroy the system. That can't be a healthcare system. If we wanted a healthcare system, you would have to pay a doctor for keeping you healthy. You would pay him a fee, and he would then pay all your medical expenses. Now, it's in his interest to keep you healthy, not to keep you sick. There was a recent study done by the federal government which showed that over 1 million people a year are seriously infected while in the hospital, and over 100,000 of them die. There's a lot of surgery that's unnecessary, we know that, and testing is just abominable, use of MRI and other stuff. It's all because the system is trying to survive by maintaining sickness and disability. And it does.
So this is an example that you're giving as to our change in inquiry. We're going to look at a different objective in healthcare.
We begin to look at what is actually the objective as opposed to what is proclaimed. It's the difference between what's practiced and what's preached. For example, another example, education, which is deteriorating. We're the only country in the world with increasing illiteracy. Our performance compared to other countries is terrible. And the reason is that our system is not about learning, which is what education is supposed to be about. It's about teaching. And we don't recognize that teaching is a major obstruction to learning. So you learn your first language, nobody taught it to you. But who ever learned the second language in school as well as they know their first language? You don't. It's estimated that 95% of what you use in your everyday work as an adult, you learned at work, not in school. Most of that it turns out to be a waste. But those who have taught learn something very fundamental. Who in a classroom learns the most? The teacher. See, schools are upside down. The way students should learn is by teaching others, not by being taught. Now, there are schools which have been designed that way, and they're remarkable. The faculty are now a resource available to the students who have to teach other students, and they learn by teaching, not by being taught. It's an entirely different concept of education. And you can take each system, your health, welfare, and so on, and you find out that they're all pursuing objectives which are contrary to their intention. So it's not a matter of efficiency, it's a matter of effectiveness.
I wasn't planning on asking a philosophical question, but given the power of your first answer, I need to ask you this question. Since you have this wisdom and this insight that strikes me as quite powerful, what is the reason that it isn't the predominant force, or will this kind of thinking be the predominant force?
That's a very good question. It goes back to something very simple, becomes complex quickly. You never learn by doing something right, because you're already doing it right. You only learn from mistakes, okay? Now, there are two kinds of mistakes. One is when you do something you shouldn't have done. A company bought another company it shouldn't have bought. Eastman Kodak bought Sterling Drug. It turned out to be a serious mistake, and they had to get rid of it, for example. That's called an error of commission. This other type of error is when you didn't do something you should have done. Eastman Kodak didn't buy Xerox when they could have. That would turn out to be a serious mistake. Now, it turns out that errors of omission are much more important than errors of commission. If you look at companies, organizations, and countries that fail, it's because of what they didn't do, not because of what they did. But now, if you look at the accounting system we use, public and private, they only record the cost of errors of commission. When you don't do something, it never appears in the books. So if you try to find out what it cost Eastman Kodak not to buy Xerox, you can't find out. If you want to find out how much it cost them to buy Sterling Drug, which they bought, you can find out. All right, now you're in an organization that says making a mistake is a bad thing, and you're a manager. So you want to keep your job and maintain stability. You don't want to make a mistake. But what kind of mistake? The only kind they record. Doing something you shouldn't have done. Now, how do you minimize the chance of doing something you shouldn't have done?
By doing nothing?
You got it. That's the answer to your question. It's our treatment of error that leads to a stability which prevents significant change. We have to start to recognize the importance of errors of omission, record and correct those errors when they're made, and that requires a whole new way of thinking.
Let's look at some omissions. I think that's a good place. I mean, I'm tempted to stay on the outline of restructuring the corporation. We can come back to that, recreating the corporation. I'd like to find out what grand omissions. You've mentioned education, we've discussed healthcare. Let's go deeper into some omissions that you see.
Well, you can do it either at the corporate or at the national level. At the national level, the principal thing we're not doing is facing the central problem confronting the world, which is the maldistribution of wealth, standard of living, and quality of life. And we're not facing that problem. And the failure to face that problem produces the unrest and is one of the central causes of the mess we're in today. We consume such a huge portion of the total resources of the world and redistribute only a very small portion of it. So we're seen outside as avaricious and miserly and so on, all of which is so. We have a wonderful life, but at the cost of others. A doctor called me yesterday, a friend of mine from Washington, and he was very upset. He said that we have now reached 4 deaths in anthrax, 14 known cases. He said, do you know there were over 10,000 children that died this morning of starvation? How come that's not in the papers? See? Omission. It's an imbalance. Now, that doesn't mean anthrax isn't a problem. Of course it's a problem. But in a sense, it's trivial compared to the problem of starvation and lack of food around the world. We're not doing very much about that.
You are watching Profonde TV with host Phyllis Haynes.
What do you think of when you think of legacy? I know I think of Benjamin Franklin, I think of our great leaders, George Washington, I think of John D. Rockefeller, I think of people who've made big contributions to society, Andrew Carnegie, but that's only one view of legacy. Legacy really is more than just the money you leave behind or the great inventions you've contributed to society. Legacy is your individual story. Now, before you say, oh, who cares about my story? You'd be amazed how some small story about you could change someone's life. My mother was a very interesting, difficult, but interesting woman. She only had a third-grade education. She, like many people, migrated from the South up to the North, married my father. But she was really kind of a philosopher in her own right. And as I got older and I was on television and people were always, coming over to the house and telling her how proud they were of me and all of those things, what I really discovered is they were coming to talk to my mother. They were coming to find out what she thought about marriage, what she thought about life, childbirth, child rearing, about how to care for the garden, about the way to deal with a difficult neighbor. She had quite a legacy. She was the classic unsung hero in my life. Now, my father, they wanted to name the street after my father. I didn't let them do that because that meant I would have had to go home back to Queens and be there every time they celebrated the naming of the street. So I said, no, thank you. He was a civic-minded father. He was a very engaged person and believed in making sure everybody participated in the care of the community and the care of the block. But my mother really was the quiet hero. Not so quiet with me, but she was the quiet hero. And I was really impressed, unfortunately, after her death, with everything that she'd been telling people. I mean, I was even at a certain point, I had a friend who, while my mother was kind of ill towards the end of her life, I had a friend who was helping me with my mother, and I paid this friend a little money so she would help my mother shop or get necessities when I couldn't be there. But what I discovered is that my mother changed her life. Just being with my mother helped her see things that she hadn't seen in her own life. So this really got me thinking about what is legacy. Really, legacy is what you can give and what you uniquely can contribute that no one else might know. There might be a recipe that you have that might really make someone feel better, a recipe for life even, a poem, a phrase, something that your mother said to you can be your legacy that you give to others. It's not just the person who wins the Nobel Prize. It's the number 2 person who doesn't win. It's the person on the short list that doesn't get the MacArthur grant. It's the school teacher who doesn't win the best teacher of the year, but may also be a profound person. You know, I watch a show on TV. I have to admit, I am a Jeopardy junkie. I love Jeopardy. My family and I do not miss Jeopardy. But you know what fascinates me are some of the losers on Jeopardy who are better than some of the old winners. Because if you really are serious about watching Jeopardy, the questions have gotten more difficult each year. And the competition has increased. So the people who don't win are sometimes just as fascinating as the winners. So all of this is to say, there are people who have great legacies to give and who shouldn't be overlooked and whose stories can change your life. I mean, I'm arrogant enough to think that even my story might be helpful. I'm not going to tell it to you now. You'll have to stay tuned. But I think there's some value in you telling your story. Now, don't start writing your memoir. The memoir projects are driving me crazy. Anybody paying attention to young people today knows that they're not hanging out reading dusty books, beautifully bound books, big volumes of books. They are reading on their phones. They are reading on Kindle. They're reading on Audible. They are not reading dusty volumes of gigantic memoirs of what you ate for breakfast at age 3. So the point I'm making is that video, independent television, and the opportunity to share your legacy with everyone around you is a real gift. Oh, let me tell you one other story. So I taught at Emerson College for a while, and it was a great experience. And I loved it. I was hired as a professional specialist, a category they made for people who had a profession, especially in broadcasting, who could then enjoy teaching. So I did. But I still continued interviewing. I'm just a fanatic for interviewing people. So I decided to interview one of the old professors there. I interviewed a lot of them, but this particular one, I really took time and went deep with this interview. And I showed him this interview, and he loved it, he enjoyed it. But then I said, can I show this to your students? So I came into his classroom, we had the monitor, he's standing right there. They'd been with him all year, and I played the interview. The students were mesmerized. Their reaction to the interview was, I didn't know you knew all that. I didn't know you thought about that. I didn't know they were so speaking to him. They were just taken with him. They said, we sat here all year. If we had known he thought about things this way. Wow. Now, it's not because I'm just a great interviewer and he was the victim of my efforts. No, it's because our younger generation is used to seeing things in a box or on a phone. It captures information for them in a certain way. And so when they get to see that information coming to you through this medium or other similar digital medium, this is going to be the way they understand. So before you kill yourself trying to capture your life in hundreds of pages that lock you down for a year or two to write, think about the best way to tell your story. And I say, legacy is the way to do it, and perhaps let Profonde TV and Legacy help you. So that's my offer to you. But whether you join us or not, think about how to tell your story in a way that keeps them engaged.
Somehow we have fallen prey to the idea that celebrities, billionaires, and people with bizarre behavior are the only ones who get attention. Although we seem to be flooded with social media, who really gets listened to and considered in our daily lives is causing us to miss often brilliant ideas and possible benefits to our world. Real genius exists in many places, in many hearts and heads, and is often simply overlooked. If you are an inventor, thought leader, visionary, or local philosopher who can help make our world a better place, sign up at greatlegacychallenge.com. There's no cost to enter Great Legacy Challenge.
You are watching Central New Jersey Network. Find us at cnjn.org. You are watching Central New Jersey Network. Engage, inform, entertain.